Hi everyone, I'm Graeme Richardson-Locke. Welcome to our second series of FESPA Coffee Breaks. It's great to be back, although I'm a little sad as this is the final session in this series before we take a break for the summer. As many of you will know, I'm FESPA's Head of Associations and Technical Lead, and as a member of the senior management team, I'm responsible for supporting our international member associations and continuing to develop technically useful material to support FESPA's specialty print communities. I'd also like to let you know that I've been working in screen and large format digital printing for more than 35 years. I initially trained as a screen printer, and my career in print has given me experiences in management and directorships in point of sale, textiles and military electronics before I came to join the FESPA team. I've seen the benefit of networking through FESPA and know that my knowledge and awareness has been enhanced by taking part in a host of events and seminars. And as an international specialty print trade federation, FESPA continues to focus its efforts on knowledge sharing and community building within the screen and wide format digital print landscape. Since FESPA was formed 59 years ago, its goal has been to help print businesses using screen and latterly digital printing to advance and take advantage of the latest technologies. We aim to keep today's session to about an hour, as we understand that your time is limited. And we really hope that you'll benefit from your participation and that you'll find some useful tips that you can build on that will support you in this disruptive and challenging market. I'm now going to do the sharing, so the questions for today's session are here, so hopefully you can see that. As we look at today's session, I know we're going to benefit from the experience of Dominic Harris, Managing Director of Carbon Quota, and Nathan Swinson-Bullough, who is the Managing Director of ImageCo, a printer who has already established a reputation for prioritising sustainable production. The topic today is carbon footprinting print products, how to face the challenge. In this FESPA Coffee Break, we'll focus our discussion on how to get started with carbon footprinting as it relates to printed materials from paper through to plastics. There are many contributory factors to consider when attempting to calculate the carbon emissions and how far back in the supply chain to go. If material suppliers could provide the CO2 for all vinyls, fabrics and composite sheets, we'd have a great start. Then the calculation of emissions produced in converting to finished printed products would need to be added energy consumed to prepare print and process orders, transport emissions and other sundry products included in the bill of materials. Once a clear methodology can be established, it becomes possible to compare our product offering and the sustainability index for each variant. Then we can promote the most appropriate print for the customer and consider whether offsetting is a good route to reaching carbon neutral goals. This is not a simple task, which is why I'm looking forward to our guests' insights. I'm now going to share with you our contact details. So I'll show this slide again at the end of today's coffee break so that you know where to reach us all. Okay, so I'm going to now ask Dominic to give us an introduction, please, Dominic. It'd be great to give our audience a bit of background on who you are, where you come from, and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Graeme. And firstly, thanks ever so much for allowing me to join the coffee break this morning. My name is Dominic Harris. I'm one of the co-founders of Carbon Quota. I come from the industry. I started out my life in the industry as a lithographic planner. You know, when I was 16 years old, so I've been in the industry for probably about 10 years. A little joke there. So yeah, I've been in the industry all my life, but we set up Carbon Quota as a business that focuses purely on the print sector to help organizations with carbon management challenges. How do you reduce your carbon footprint? How do you measure your carbon footprint? So yeah, that's us and that's my business.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dominic. Nathan, Let's have your resume next, please.
Morning, everyone, and thanks for having me back. Thanks, Graeme. Yeah, I'm Swinson-Bullough, Managing Director of ImageCo in Leeds. We specialise in wide format print, signage, retail display and POS, events, exhibitions, producing work all over the UK and into Europe as well. I'm also Head of Sustainability for the FESPA. I'm on the FESPA board. At ImageCo, I've been addressing sustainability now for a good 3 years, looking at everything from the materials that we use to our energy and how we go about reducing our carbon. So the whole topic of today is relatively new to me, and since my introduction to Dominic and the scope for emissions of the products we use, it's really interesting to see just the carbon kind of associated with that. So really looking forward to what we've got to discover and hopefully help if you're out there kind of follow our journey. So looking forward to it.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to launch a poll, which I'd like you to please to complete, just so we can get a better idea of who's out there and with us today. Okay, I'll leave this open for about a minute so that we can just get some detail. So we're nearly just over half our attendees have completed the poll so far. We've got a big spike in digital printers with us today. Mm-hmm. So a typical broad brush, really. Dominic, we've got some garment decorators and textile printers with us also. A smaller cohort of signage companies, and yeah, 30% are involved in screen printing. But yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you everyone. That just gives us a nice idea of who's sort of in the room, so to speak, today. Right. Okay. So without further delay, let's get started with the first in our questions. So the opportunity to calculate the environmental impact of printed products is quite straightforward, with many providers to choose from. Dominic, first of all, what's important when considering the suppliers we work with?
Yeah, I guess if you look at that, take that question and put it through the lens of a large buying organisation, first of all. So if I'm a Procter & Gamble, I'm Sainsbury's, I'm Lidl, one of those large mega brands, if you ask that question through their lens, yeah. They will be looking at the carbon emissions of the product that their supply chain produces for them. So they'll be looking at, their food products, and broadly speaking, it's probably about 90%. If you look at a supermarket, 90% of their carbon footprint is in their supply chain. And within their supply chain is all your members, very simply. So okay. Those large organizations will be looking at the printing organizations to manage their carbon emissions effectively. So looking at what is their baseline, what are their reduction targets, how do they validate what the carbon footprint is, what protocol, how do they measure the carbon footprint. There's lots of dynamics they'll be looking at, and that's driving lots of conversation today around carbon footprinting, is those mega brands at the top pushing down to the supply chain.
And I suppose the key point there is as 90% of their emissions are coming from scope 3 or outside sources. That's why they are particularly motivated, because they're all generally PLCs. They're generally all signed up to quite high levels of reporting requirement. So it kind of that's why the push down is not going anywhere, right?
No, it's not, and it's only going to become harder and stronger as we move forward. Because they've got the budget and they've got the know-how, and they've signed up to the Carbon Disclosure Project or the Science-Based Targets, all of those global initiatives that happen in the world, they can afford to sign up because they're big businesses, but they're pushing the problem down to the supply chain, because the emissions within the supply chain is where they can make most difference. So in the print supply chain, if you're a print supplier to one of those big organizations, it's about how do you measure your supply, how do you measure your operations? Because that's what the mega brands want to know, is what's the carbon footprint of supplier A versus supplier B. Okay, so actually when you look at it through, take that question, Graeme, and look at it through the lens of a print provider, it's about changing, it's about understanding what the carbon footprint of your operation, the stuff you can control. And that's the really important piece. Is it's very hard to affect carbon emissions on things you cannot control. So what's broadly speaking scope 1 and scope 2 from a technical point of view is emissions within your own control. So within your own factory, your lighting, your energy source, whether you've got oil burners or gas central heating, or whether you've got electric vehicles, those things are in your gift to be able to change. And that ultimately is about how we all decarbonize, the supply chain. Yes, in our personal lives as well, but equally, within our own factories. And given the point I made earlier, around 90% of our supermarkets' carbon footprint is in the supply chain, that means we all have responsibility to help decarbonize.
Okay, great. Nathan, what would you like to add on this one?
Yeah, it's like Dominic said, we've addressed scope 1 and 2, which you get actual readings of energy, like putting the solar panels in. We could get a comparison to what we were burning CO2 wise, before we put them in. Same goes for all the energy, the voltage optimization, we're getting actual stats. But to look at your products coming in and where they're coming from, it's a bit of a minefield, especially in what we do. There's so many different variables, materials, inks, machines. It's where do you start? So if we were looking to a provider, we'd need somebody to come in and really understand our business. There's a lot there, and it's not like we're printing, brochures every day or packaging. It's vinyls, it's banners, it's so much more diverse in there. And to get any accurate kind of data, they'd have to spend quite a while, almost daily, because not two jobs are the same more often than not. So it's understanding that and finding out, the source of. We can give kind of the material details, but it's really getting under our skin and understanding that.
Okay. So just on the energy front, just out of interest, I know that if you invest in solar, you've got there's a longer tail on the investment, on the return on investment. But in terms of the carbon reduction from sourcing your energy just from the grid, what kind of percentage improvement do you see? Is it?
Well, the actual panels we've put in, I think we're running on 44% now on solar. We're in the process of getting the rest of the energy procured by renewable sources. Yeah. So that will be hopefully 100% when the contract changes. Everything will be renewable. So the solar saving alone, I think, is around about, I can't remember the exact figures. We're looking at around 20 tonne per year of CO2 on the solar going in there. And then the renewable will kind of take everything else down. We've also got the voltage optimization, which really reduces the energy output of our actual operations. So I think that's about 7 tonnes of CO2 just on waste energy. But you can get actual readings of that. We've got software, and we've got the dial on the solar that's giving it's almost like a clock counting the kilowatts and the savings daily, where it's completely it's there to see. Whereas, like I mentioned before, the products coming in, it's really difficult to manage and monitor.
Yeah, any print company, the majority of their carbon footprint of scope 1 and 2 is within energy. That's a very wide word. It could be gas, oil, electric. And certainly there are quick wins that any business can make by switching to a renewable source of some description. And, your energy suppliers all have renewable tariffs. That certainly is a quick win and will make an enormous difference, and only has a marginal cost difference as well. So as a very simple bit of advice, that is a very quick win just to start everybody on the journey.
I think also something I would add from personal experience is I worked in the printed electronics sector many years ago, 25 years ago, I suppose now. And at that time we were running screen print lines for electronics, but we were curing with infrared energy, and we changed the process, invested in UV curing energy, and that allowed us to make some further changes downstream to the production process that meant we could save huge amounts of water, huge amounts of energy, and we won an award for energy efficiency improvement. And I think, you know, it's just, these are all the stages and steps, aren't they? It's thoroughly examining your process, looking at, there are so many opportunities to actually save money and reduce usage and lower your carbon at the same time. So it's not always expense.
No, and it's about it's about establishing what your carbon hotspot is within your organisation. And 9 times out of 10 is going to be energy, but it could be other things as well within your organisation. And once you create a baseline and understand scientifically where your carbon hotspots are, that's then drives your change behaviour. So you focus where your biggest problem is, because that's where you're having the biggest effect. That doesn't mean you ignore everything else, but ultimately, if the biggest problem's your energy source, that's where you focus.
It's the best place to start, isn't it?
It's quite common sense, really. Yeah.
We had mercury curing on the UV machines, and then we switched to LED on the VUTEC. So the energy there was significantly reduced. And then we took out the DERS Lambda, which had almost like a hot tub of water for the processing chemicals daily. The chemicals weren't nice. But, it's a backbone of ImageCo. We've had it almost 20 years, but when we've put the new HP Latex 800 in, it's we've got rid of that. We've got rid of the processor, which is heated constantly. So we wanted to get that monitored before it was taken out, but we didn't get a chance. So we don't know what that exactly, the power consumption was.
It's strange, because you could probably have shown significant improvement, couldn't you, on the year-on-year?
Yeah. So if we were running, just one small Durotran in a day, we'd have to keep that. I mean, it's exaggerating there, but we'd have to keep that processor heated. Whereas now the latex, you print it and it's off and it's done. There's a lot of kind of questions over the heat of the latex emitted, but we're running on solar energy, so it's it's kind of balanced in that way.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, well look, so many printers in FESPA's membership are printing on a wide range of substrates, as we've touched upon, with a wide range of companies. How can we calculate the emissions for these applications and ensure our results are both reliable and reportable? Dominic, if you'd like to take this one on.
Yeah, there's a real challenge right now out in our industry, in the carbon industry, is that using the same methodology to measure one factory versus another factory, or one material versus the other material, is absolutely critical. We set our bar high, by the way. We work to the highest international standards that are governed under GHG protocol, and we work to ISO standards and PAS standards and all sorts of stuff. But what that means is that when any organization is saying what is the carbon footprint of one piece of paper versus another piece of paper, you can make an informed decision, because they're measured in the same way. Now, sadly, the industry, because it's a relatively new industry, some of that methodology does change from material supplier to material supplier. And, a great example of that recently was we looked at a fiber-based product, and the CO2 footprint of one product looked at from the forest through to the delivery to the printer, which is the full life cycle of that material product, a true carbon footprint, versus another carbon footprint only looked at the refining milling process. So what it's doing is missing certain areas of the carbon footprint, therefore declaring a lower footprint when actually it may or may not be, we don't know, it may or not be, that difference. So it's all about using methodology and setting the bar very high, and everybody working to the same international standards.
Is that, just sorry, for my own benefit, is that ISO 16758? Is that the...
Well, GHG protocol, and under within that you've got 14,044 and 14,064. There's a whole bunch of them, Graeme. I'm happy to put it on the chat afterwards if you want me to, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that sits under the GHG protocol. That's not, it's not our measure. It's not our standard. It's an international standard that any business that is carrying out carbon footprint should be working towards. There's no question about it. That's the way it should be done.
Yeah, because that gives you a chance of like for like, meaningful, internationally agreed, comparable metrics, doesn't it?
Yeah, comparing apples with apples. We've done a study of 2 printing companies that are pretty much identical in size and scale. And actually you can have a 50 to 60% difference in carbon footprint. Now, as long as the methodologies are both exactly the same, you can validate whether that 50 to 60% difference is right. Yeah. And clearly we do. And what that does is allow you then to make those apples for apples comparisons, to make the right decision, because this is all about global warming and climate change, right? It's all about doing the right thing. So really important, to answer your initial question, is to use the same methodology. Expertise, I think, is the next piece, just to follow on a little bit more. And I would say this, but having an independent organisation to help measure those carbon footprints is very powerful when you're dealing with the mega brands. In time, we suspect that's going to be, become the norm for organisations. And it is a very technical, complex thing to do, to be fair. We've got print experts, material experts, and they're surrounded by scientists, right? People, PhD doctors in environmental science. So this is something that needs to be done with the right expertise, and in our view, it should be done independently as well.
And I think a point worth making is the value that you bring. We know now that through across the board, scientific evidence of climate change, of all the pressures that are being put on Earth systems, we have very, very powerful scientific metrics and measurements that are constantly improving. But I know from my experience on TC 130 on the technical committee for printing and graphic technologies that I sit there as more of a reporting role for FESPA than a practitioner, and the level of scientific knowledge within that group, in that particular ISO committee, is intense, to say the least. And the kind of maths and stuff that the genius that lies behind it. But what people need is you to be able to filter, to use the methodology, but not to explain too much of it to
and our scientists are in the background. Generally, they're put in dark rooms, they do very scientific stuff, and that's just the way we structured our business. It tends to work better that way. And I guess finally, Graeme, before we hand over to Nathan, the most important piece here is that if you don't use a standard methodology and you don't baseline, and then you declare, I have reduced carbon, or we have reduced carbon, you need to be able to prove that, because ultimately reducing carbon helps climate change. It's very simple. And actually it has to be scientifically driven to say, I've reduced carbon, therefore I've done a good thing for the planet. So actually that science is vitally important to prove actually we're heading towards net zero. Because we have a big problem, right? The world has a problem and we need to resolve it. So that science is absolutely critical.
Yeah, good point. Nathan, so from a printer's point of view, who's getting into this, what would you like to add?
Well, yeah, you need to be looking for expertise, like Dominic said, and then present it in the simplest manner. It's like having your own business and giving your accountant a just big pile of paper and say, there you go, work my tax out. I don't care how you got there. I just need to see, the results. Because I mean, we're beginning to understand it, but you don't need to understand the exact science. So just come in, we'll show you, what we need to do. There you go, do the research and show us where we can, where we can reduce, or, where the carbon is in particular products, and just present it very simple. And yeah, I think that's the best way for anyone, because I'm pretty sure most business printer owners out there will not understand this process, because it's scientific led, and like I say, there's a lot of research going into it in the background to make that possible. So keep it simple and almost out of the way.
I mean, yeah, I know I've seen some of the comparative reports that you produce at carbon quota, and it's a very digestible, you know, you've done a really good job, I think, of.
Yeah, no, thank you. We try hard, right? Because it is complex.
And very kind of clean, well presented, and I think you know, you can just take away all the layers that sit behind that and just end up with the quality metric. But again, as you said, Dominic, the important thing is that if you are scrutinized for your methodology, then you have you know, you can take people down that rabbit hole if they need it. But
and those mega brands work to very high standards. That's why we say it's not, well, it is because we run a business, but ultimately, if you are Sainsbury's, your Lidl, your Diageo, your Unilever, your Procter & Gamble, they work to their standards. So that's kind of what they expect from the supply chain. Whether it's distilled down yet, you know, time will tell, but it will, you know, I think as the years go on, this is getting tougher and tougher and tougher.
I saw on LinkedIn, Lidl,
sorry, Nathan.
Sorry, Graham. Saying Lidl have announced they're looking at their scope 3 emissions. Yesterday, I saw an article on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And you know, they're looking at carbon neutral cheese as a product and things like that. So I think it's
that's
quite an interesting article. It's all kind of more locally sourced. So I think the same principles applies for the industry. So if you can present that data that you have, and then it helps us formulate decisions on, you know, on future providers and where maybe to change our products from.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So if we're looking at the kind of typical mix of printed products in a printer, so what aspects of our members' printed product account for the greatest proportion of CO2? I think that's a very difficult question for you to answer, but maybe you can give us a broad brush kind of.
Yeah. So rule of thumb, Graham, if you look at a printed product, 50% of the carbon emissions come from materials and substrates. I'll come back to that piece in a minute. So that's the lion's share as such, 50%. The other 50% comes from, you've got about 20% of the carbon emissions comes from manufacturing. So the members' operations, that's about 20%. And then another 10% of that is consumables, inks, pallets, you know, tape around boxes, tubes, is about another 10%. And then distribution, and this is a very difficult one to answer because it depends where the job's being delivered to, is about 10% again, but it can be as high as 30%. And then finally, the last 10% is end of life. And again, that varies from country to country, depending on what happens from a recycling point of view. And it varies from product to product, because you may know that one particular product absolutely is going to end up in recycling because it has a closed loop process that has a slightly different, you know, lower carbon footprint than a product that just ends up into, you know, local county council recycling. So it is a very difficult thing to, you know, come up with a rule of thumb on, but broadly speaking, the main lump is the materials, and that's where, to be fair, we spend a lot of time looking at materials, and it's one of the objectives this year for us is to look at a wide range of materials. We've done about 1,000. To give you an idea of the scale, and this is, you know, links back to what Nathan was saying earlier, we think there are 30,000 types of materials that need to have standardized carbon footprints. So you have standard methodology comparing eggs to eggs. So when you go back to your question, Graham, of what's the carbon footprint of a print product, if everybody focuses on their operations, that's 20%. If we all focus on materials, that's 50%. That's 70% of the carbon footprint. And the other bits are, you know, a little bit simpler to reduce anyway. So actually materials is a main focus for us, and operations is a main focus for us, is to help organizations make decisions and start, you know, reduction targets in those two main areas.
And am I right in thinking that, you know, I know that from what I've read, that you can use kind of calculations from DEFRA that give you maybe a factor of difference between a ton of paper and a ton of aluminium and a ton of plastic, but they don't really kind of drill into the detail very much. Am I right in thinking that with your methodology that you can distinguish between polypropylene and PVC? Yeah. Are we at that point?
Yeah, no, we're much deeper. We do use the DEFRA data if nothing else is available, but we've got many other paid for databases that every carbon business uses. Eco Event is a great example. There's one from Gabby, which is owned by Sphera. There are licensed databases that we've purchased as part of our business. They give much more detailed studies. The DEFRA detail is available. It's free online. It's public available. Stuff. There's one called ICE as well. That's 12 years old and it is publicly available. But it's 12 years old, so therefore these things get refreshed every year. They get enhanced, they get improved. It's something that we spend a lot of time making sure we've got the right source emission data that makes up the component parts of the carbon footprint, because as I say, it gets changed every year.
Well, and I suppose things like energy, renewable, as renewables increase, that would reduce the carbon impact of products. So if that database isn't being constantly updated,
it's a living, breathing beast, Graeme. It really is. It changes regularly.
Overstating your carbon because you're using the wrong underlying calculation, which kind of goes back to your earlier point.
Yeah.
I suppose one other thing is, end of life. I think we are currently experiencing, probably in every country, insufficient infrastructure for recycling effectively, but we are seeing improvement and change in that area. But maybe we need legislation, we need governance to catch up.
We do very much so. There's no question about it. It has to be a government-led thing. Certainly from a domestic point of view, we all know what we recycle at home. Do we know actually what happens to that once the dustmen pick it up? Probably not. There's lots of data available, from government around that. But ultimately, there is so much more they can do. And I think there is a responsibility on the mega brands as well. So and I keep coming back to this analogy of a supermarket, is what do they do with their goods when they've finished with it? So, how do they segregate the packaging? What do they do with it at the back of the store? That stuff they can do as well. That really helps. But, it does come back to there is a lot of government work that needs to be done, to help this challenge.
I think, even from both a domestic and commercial perspective in Brighton, where I live, where we have a green local authority, we've got a strong kind of desire within the community to do better. We still face in our household, we pay a separate for a separate pickup of plastics twice a month because the local authority scheme won't actually pick up all of the types of plastics that are commonly being used. So we're very much trying to look at this kind of the reduce, reuse, recycle thinking to try and just do better. And then what we can't do, we're currently offsetting, we're using renewable energy and then the balance we're offsetting, which we'll come back to, I know. Nathan, I'm sure that you'll have something to say about all of that.
Yeah, a lot. So on the carbon reporting side of it, obviously, again, we need to be led by Dominic and their research. But in terms of the recycling, I got our waste management company in last week, along with DryTac. It was quite depressing, to be honest. There's a hell of a lot of products out there that can be recycled, even though we've done a lot of research into like recycled bottle wallpaper, recycled bottle fabrics for light boxes. It still can't be recycled. It's energy to waste. So there's a lot of work to be done from the providers. In terms of where we're looking at polypropylene, but then they specialize in print. Our waste management, it's the guy deals specifically with print. So polypropylene, it can be recycled, but the amounts coming from print providers are that small that it's not valuable. So part of my task at FESPA UK, we're speaking to the management team now is, a collection hubs from all the different printers and then to recycle en masse. Brilliant. But then from a materials manufacturing point of view, which is why Sean at DryTac was present, they need to know what to make, what adhesives. We're going to run some tests on what forms of adhesive can it be. So, if you have a certain type of adhesive on a product, then it can't be recycled. And so they need to know that to make it, and then we need to try it and print it and then sell it. And and then you're looking at the carbon reporting of all that mixed in, it's like, good luck.
Yeah. One thing I would say to you is that, you know, from my experience working across our international association network, is we're seeing the same initiative. FESPA Denmark, you know, as a point of connection for you, Michael Brockman and the team at FESPA Denmark would be worth you reaching out to, because they've got a lot of experience. And I think that FESPA Italia are also working at the moment on looking at group collection schemes. So
yeah,
it might be worth, you know, if you want to hook up a call at some point. You know,
yeah, absolutely. I think the more that we find out, you know, we can help the industry, and that's a plan, you know, to help improve. And it has to go right down to the point where what can be recycled and how it's massively important.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I was kind of wondering about was, you know, the sort of importing, and I suppose the transport distances. So many substrates are imported from China due to globalized supply chains. Do you feel that there's a powerful argument from a carbon reduction point of view to localized sourcing? And yeah, how do you see that? So, Dominic.
Yeah, look, there's nearly every example we've looked at, sourcing from a country like, you know, material from China is 50% higher than sourcing material from, you know, Europe or you know, and clearly it's better again if you source it and it's made in the UK. But that's a challenging thing to say, right? Is that material from China is much cheaper, and therefore when your customer is buying on price, they may not consider the environment. But the material from Europe may be a little bit more expensive, but your customer may not want to pay for that. So it is, I accept, it's a really challenging area. But in very broad brush terms, material from China is about 50% higher from a carbon footprint point of view. And that's driven from a couple of things. That's driven from the energy source for manufacturing that material is usually a coal energy source. You know, the power stations are fueled by coal, therefore the emissions are much, much higher. And the distance it has to travel back to the UK. So, you know, those two things are really the contributing factors. And ultimately sourcing locally, as you would with your fruit and veg, you know, it's the right thing to do. Sourcing locally has a lower carbon footprint. The last thing really to add is you've got to consider where it's being delivered to after the job has been produced, because that has quite a significant impact on the carbon footprint. So in the scenario, and I doubt this really happens, that you buy material from China, you ship it back into the UK to manufacture, and then ship it back into China again, that clearly is very bad for the environment, because you're moving material backwards and forwards. Yeah. So there's just a consideration you always need to think about around where's the final job being delivered to.
I think there's been some quite interesting examples of with drop shipping in digital print, where businesses are being set up with an operation in Europe, and then they're setting up satellite facilities in other continents so that they can do regionalized, you know, more localized supply. I'm sure it's something that we're going to see continue to evolve. Yeah, Nathan. So you know, I know you personally spend a lot of time in researching materials. How are you getting on with this area of trying to source more locally? How is that looking?
Yeah, you know, it's not too bad. You can now go to Europe or some in the UK as well, and we can find pretty much every material that we need. But it's going back to what Dominic said. Now, especially after the pandemic, we're finding a bit of a price war. And I think most printers are. So if you want cheap and cheerful, it's China. Where if you want something, you know, a little bit more pricey with a lower carbon footprint, it's Europe or some in the UK as well. But then it comes down to the customer, you know, are they actually bothered about where it's come from? They just want their job for the best possible price. And if that could mean the difference in winning or losing a job. So we've got to kind of balance that. My personal preference is, you know, we don't do cheap and cheerful. We you know, we're sustainable. We're using the best materials. I know some of our products still are coming from China. We are looking at eradicating that. It's not everything now, but I think one of our favourite products is Zanita board from Antalis. That's South Africa, and that product itself, it's worth the whole carbon footprint and the sustainability behind it. Yeah, it comes a little bit further than we'd like, but it is what it is, and it's a fantastic product. So yeah, it's a tough one, and I think some printers are out there, that's their game, cheap and cheerful, where we're a bit more creative, sustainable. So we do hold a higher price than some, and competing with the others, it's a case of winning or losing work. I mean, ideally, everything would be local, and if it comes down to carbon reports in the future, then maybe things will change, and legislation could sway that for us. But it's a tough one.
I think it's a good point to make, because I think at the time that government looks at penalising imports from far off, it's I don't think it's unlikely that will happen at some point. But
I am. If you look at something like Unilever, and this is a very good, little snip, little story for you. Yeah. Unilever stated that they want to see carbon footprints on every invoice and every quote of goods they buy. So now that's a very, very bold statement, and will take many years to implement. So, but the essence of what they're saying is, when they purchase goods from a supplier, they want to see the financial costs and the environmental costs next door to each other. So in essence, what they're saying, and whether they're actually doing it in practice is a different story, right? But in essence, what they're saying is they will make the decision on what they buy on two metrics: money and environment. And that has to be a good thing for our industry, right? It means that we all need to do lots of work to work out how to put a carbon footprint next to the financial price. That's the challenge we're all going to face. But ultimately, if a big organisation like Unilever have publicly said that, and it's on their website, other organisations will follow, and fundamentally, that's driving the right behaviour into the supply chain.
Yeah, and it's starting to look like regenerative business practice, isn't it? Which is exactly where we need to be. Yeah, I was at a sustainable leadership forum just before the pandemic. And at that point, I was sitting in the room with Boots Alliance, with Lloyd's, with Rolls-Royce, with the SmithKline Beecham, whole bunch of very large corporations. And they were, I was asking them how many of their suppliers in their supply chain are able to offer carbon footprint of printed products. And Lloyd's particularly said that it is something that their supply chain is already doing, and they find it immensely useful. This forum that I was involved with was all the kind of sustainable heads of department from all these groups, and they're all saying, this is exactly the behaviour we need.
So we're doing it for Lloyd's, by the way.
Sorry,
we're behind the Lloyd's one.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, the carbon footprint of their customer communications and bank statements.
Okay. Yeah. And the other one was SmithKline Beecham. They were saying that if you want to be a supplier, these are fundamental requirements. So there is no business opportunity. So I suppose the interesting thing about this comparison between low cost and added value, I would say that any business that is in reasonable financial shape, which is reasonably responsible in its business practice, is not going to balk at paying a little extra for satisfying these needs. But just as in we see, fast fashion coming out of low cost economies where, it's certainly not a case of people, planet, profit. I think those business models will exist for some time yet, but yeah, there are some businesses you just don't want to be involved with. Generally their only metric is price, isn't it? And we've all been in those kind of scenarios. And I know in the fashion industry, it's been very prevalent where you'll set a contract price for working with a major sportswear brand, and then you'll end up with, 40–50% of your production for that brand because there's high volumes involved. And then next year, when they come to reviewing contract, they say, well, now you're used to dealing with us, you can drop a further 5% off your and the places that end up being compromised are health and safety, are worker rights, and that's why we ended up with situations like Rana Plaza factory collapses, because you can't. A lot of these factories are under enormous pressure when the only conversation is price, and I think it's something that
I think in our sector, Graeme, there's another layer of complexity where the paying organisation, the end customer, may outsource the buying of the goods to third parties. So they might outsource to a print management company or a design agency, and it just naturally is a very long supply chain. So back to the analogy of Sainsbury's, if they are wanting to produce a sign for one of their shops, that naturally is a very complex supply chain and if you work from the bottom up, it starts with the materials and it goes to the manufacturer, and then there's deliveries in there, and then above that, if you've got that layer of print manager or design agency, it's 3 or 4 layers deep, that supply chain, and that's what makes it quite complex from a print point of view. It's just a complex supply chain. So and actually, if you're head of sustainability Unilever, you're looking down on that supply chain. They're not technical like us. They wouldn't understand how you address it. In time, I think it will come, but it's just a very, very complex supply chain.
Yeah, actually, I had some experience working with LOCOG during the London Olympics, and we were SEDEX. We had to have Bureau Veritas in to do auditing, and then we're a SEDEX supplier. But the irony was that we had the capability to manufacture quite a lot of the product, and yet we lost out quite a lot of the orders to companies that were farming it offshore. So it was really annoying. So we live in far from an imperfect world, but that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be
keep trying,
engaging and improving, right? It's just that's our, I think you kind of get to a point at which there is a broader responsibility here, as you mentioned earlier on, really. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question here. So and we've sort of touched upon this, but more kind of explicitly, I'd like to know both of your points of view. So the question is, how long do you think it will be before national legislation and carbon taxing catch up with the need to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Wow, it's a big question. What is the government going to do next? I don't think anybody can answer that question anyway. But look, my view on the world, I think,
I'm interested in your I absolutely get why you would put that caveat there, but I suppose on both your personal opinions on that situation.
So I guess this year we've seen a massive increase in people having the conversations around sustainability with, the G7. We've got COP26 coming up in October/November this year. There's lots of governmental rhetoric around how things are changing and what they're going to do, because there is a coming together of lots of very important people at COP26, and they're all in the race to beat each other, right? I think the dynamic of Biden in America has helped enormously, because Biden's predecessor really had some interesting views on the environment, and I think Biden coming in has really helped create more competition around the super states, and that really helps from a progression point of view. But looking at it from a legislation point of view, there is legislation today, but sadly, that only applies to a very small percentage of the print sector. It's called Streamline Energy and Carbon Reporting, a very catchy phrase that the government have come up with, or SECR, or some people call it SECA. And that's for businesses that are over 32 million or have more than 250 employees. Now, if you apply the SECR legislation, the organisations that have to report their carbon footprints I think that's about 100 printers in the UK out of 8,400. Yeah. So because we are a you know, a whole industry of small businesses, that's what the print sector is. So SECR only applies to over 32 million, and what that means is when they do their regulatory reports at year end, they have to declare certain information around carbon emission, but that's only for 100 companies in the UK in the print sector. So it's not very useful. Now, I suspect that threshold is going to reduce. They'll take the 32 million down to something much lower. That will certainly help all organisations. Will it become a carbon tax? I doubt it will be directly to organisations, but I think there will be regulatory obligations on organisations, certainly in our sector, which is a very carbon intense sector. There will be regulatory obligations to report carbon emissions. Now, whether they have to be then certified by a third party, we would like to think so. Certainly you wouldn't, you know, you have to have your year-end accounts audited by your accountant, and carbon equally is important as, you know, as finance. So, you know, the hope is that government will say that they have to, you know, have a third party to audit or you know, or certify what the carbon emissions are. So, but we would expect something around in the next 2 or 3 years, Graeme. I would really expect governments, you know, to really tighten the legislation around carbon reporting, because it is the, you know, the #1 global priority. Now COVID's hopefully behind us.
Yeah, or at least under management.
Yeah.
From our point of view, obviously we're nowhere near the 32 million bracket. But I think if you look at some of the clients we work with, you know, we do big retailers and sports retailers. If they're looking and to come down to us, you know, for our carbon reporting, that everyone needs to be on the front foot. Really, it's no good. Suddenly you get a job, we need a carbon report. Ooh, where do we start? You know, it's like almost leaving your homework to the last minute and having to rush it, and you know, do it that way. If you're on the front foot and you got that report in place, then there you go. There's a kind of backing, whether legislation touches us or not. And I think for me, it's always been about the right thing to do, not about legislation and making money. And it's the right thing that we should be doing and what everyone should be doing. So if it does or it doesn't affect us, I think it should be done. And there's something there. It's like say the tax at the end of the year, finances, it should sit along that and be in place, in my view.
Yeah. And, you know, legislation aside, there are some very powerful international programs at play now where all of the mega brands are signed up to. So you've got the climate disclosure project that most businesses sign up to. So, and that very simply means they every year declare transparently their carbon emissions to the CDP, the climate disclosure project. You've got the science-based target initiatives. You've got the sustainable development goals. These are all initiatives, charity-based initiatives that sit above organisations that are all driving for transparency, and they all obligate large organisations to sign up to one of their sort of methodologies, one of their clubs as such, and that's driving great behaviour through industry. It's beginning to push down to the to the manufacturer level, but ultimately back to the analogy of a supermarket, they absolutely have signed up to the science-based target initiatives, and that regulates how people behave and drives lots and lots of transparency. Just say, this is our carbon footprint, let's be transparent about it, and this is how we're going to reduce it. Even by making that type of statement is a very powerful thing to do, and that doesn't need government to do that.
Yeah. I was just looking actually that the climate pledge is another
one,
good example, isn't it, of where we are. So lots of businesses saying reach carbon neutral by 2050, but we know that actually the hard work needs to be done in the next 10 years. It's not we cannot wait until 2040 and then try and squeeze it all in that decade, because we'll overshoot considerably, and we'll be if we're facing a world of 4 or 5 degrees of temperature rise, we are going to experience a whole world of trouble. Absolutely. I think something that I wanted to mention, which I thought was quite useful as a reference point, is you know, we know that offsetting is what we do with the residual carbon that we can't deal with through changing our processes and our practices. But there's a useful site called Red Monitor. So it's red, REDD-monitor.org. And I was looking at that the other day and seeing some of the sort of cases that have been taken out against bad practice in carbon offsets and that area. So probably worth checking out if someone's coming to you with a particularly good deal. It might be worth just looking them up and using that as a bit of due diligence. Gents, thank you so much for, you know, it's been really interesting discussion as I had hoped and kind of thought we would get to. So thank you. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A that I'd like to have us to have a look at. So we've got one of our guests is asking about how this process fits in with ISO 14001 and continuous improvement. I don't know if you...
Yeah, fully supports it. Yeah, absolutely. You know, carbon reduction is a continuous process. It's something that certainly does not happen overnight. And it is certainly not something that's a switch you flick on and you've reduced your carbon. It's something that's a continuous process. So it dovetails beautifully into ISO 14001. When we talk about carbon footprinting and operation, it's an annual certification process. So you measure year versus year. You know, typically that's how you do it. You can go quarter versus quarter, but it becomes more complex. So typically what you do is have a certified carbon footprint against your financial year, and then the next year you do it again and compare, and what that does is show the reduction target, which that methodology I just spoke about is 14001.
Yeah,
we're actually going through that process now. We've not been audited yet. We've got an internal assessor coming in, and she's kind of really looking at areas in the factory and everywhere, and this will be kind of an integral part of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Paul, if you want any info once we've got there, then I'll happily share it.
Brilliant, thank you. And then we have one other question, which is, do you have an idea of the different CO2 for the different printing technologies? So who is the most pollutant? So I suppose that question is looking to the differences between solvent, UV, in, you know, different inkjet, ink chemistries and curing technologies. I mean, I don't know whether there's anything you can add on that.
Digital generally is better as a lower carbon footprint because it uses less chemicals and, you know, less energy and all the rest of it. But it depends on the job as well. If it's a very, very long job, you know, more in the kind of sort of, you know, commercial print area, you know, if you're printing 200,000, you know, brochures, you clearly wouldn't do that digitally. You do it via, you know, a litho press. So it's when you look at it from a unit point of view, what's one brochure or one, you know, wall graphic, that's why you need to get to the level of detail, is to compare one wall graphic versus one wall graphic, and then look at different machinery. So, but broad brush digital is better than, you know, than non-digital in effect.
And I suppose within digital, UV has a lower emissions rating than solvent, so yeah, that I think that's why UV has been popular. But latex and UV with LED rather than UV with metal halide or mercury vapor curing. But latex is, I haven't actually seen any really close up direct study of latex versus UV LED, but I think that's quite an interesting,
quite a nice study there, but we've not done it that I know of anyway. If I have, I'll let you know, but I'm pretty sure we haven't.
Yeah, happy to help with that as well. We've got the new latex, and it's not just the ink, the cartridges now. They've got Planet Partners with HP. You know, you can take the cartridges back. They're actually making the parts. The machine's made from 30% recycled plastic. They've got recycling plants in Haiti that, you know, they make the actual parts from, not just for the latex, but for the in general. So if you look down, you know, the kind of the chain of any provider and what it's about, then it's yeah, there's a lot to learn. I think water-based is definitely the future for all print. Certainly for our industry.
Yeah, that's a great.
And a lot of stuff is a trade-off, sadly, and you know, this is a sad reality of carbon footprint. And I've just seen one of the questions pop up around UV cured inks can affect the recycling process. Absolutely agree. It's a trade-off. You've got to make a decision between, is it a lower carbon footprint, and why choose something that's got a lower carbon footprint that makes it non-recyclable? There has to be a trade-off and a decision made on all of this stuff, I'm afraid.
It's very dependent on areas as well, because some UV can, we've investigated that because we've got the VUTEC, and some can, you know, processes, streams can be recycled, more paper-based things, but generally, when we're looking at, we've won a lot of projects based on the latex and water-based. I mean, we have only got the roll capacity at the minute, but you did some studies, didn't you, on two products as well, and our recycled bottle wallpaper, like 80% reduction on CO2 compared to vinyl and the different processes. So there's a lot.
That's enormous, Nathan.
Yeah, it's massive. Yeah. But yeah, it's some can be recycled, but more often than not, Paul, they can't.
And I suppose when you're talking to clients, Nathan, the way you market your product and your, you know, having these metrics and this availability to present this information, you are, you know, likely to be able to inspire more trust and more commitment in the work you're doing. So I think in time, it will inevitably there's inevitably a business benefit to be derived, but it's a lot of commitment, isn't it? So it's an awful lot of commitment.
Well, I'm spending a lot of my time on it, and we go back to the pricing thing, you know, compared to some cheap printers, you know, they're just throwing it out the door on anything, compared to, you know, we might be a little bit more, but we're putting that research in, using the right materials, inks, everything, and there's a lot of work goes into it, you know, behind the scenes. It's not just about print on PVC free, it's everything else that goes with it, and you know, there's a price comes with that.
And when we look across the other kind of topics that I've spoken about with guests during the coffee breaks, when we look at software automation, when we look at process control, you know, all of these things feed into better business, but none of them come for free in terms of time and commitment and educating yourself as much as anyone else. It's just if you believe in creating a business with a better future, these are the topics that have to be addressed. So hopefully within the series of events that we've run, there's been quite a lot of inspiring stuff. I know it's been so far an absolute pleasure for me to have guests like you guys, and you know, it's been so instructive, all of this, that I think it's great. So I'm looking at my clock, and we have gone unsurprisingly, people who know me well enough to know that unsurprisingly I do tend to extend beyond the deadline slightly. But I just want to say thank you both so much for your contribution today. And, you know, I'm looking forward to furthering our discussions after this. Thank you to all our guests for participating, and we would encourage you to look out for the next season of FESPA Coffee Breaks, which will be later in the year, when we'll continue looking at topics that matter. If you're interested in watching this webinar, please feel free to check out our YouTube channel, FESPA TV, where it can be found from tomorrow or possibly the day after, because one of my colleagues who usually manages this is off today. Please complete the survey that will be sent out to you after the webinar and give us some feedback. We really value it. And, you know, we understand fully that when you're running a business, you have an awful lot to be getting on with. So taking time out during a coffee break to come and participate in these conversations is a commitment. So we want to do better. So if you have ideas, please share them with us. I'm now going to share again the our contact details. So you've got our email addresses here in front of you. I know that you know, we're all happy to receive further inquiries from you. I think from my side, I would just like to say thank you again, and I wish you all a great summer. I've just cancelled my long-awaited trip to California because of COVID, which is frustrating, but I'm heading to Scotland on my mountain bike, and I'm going to lose myself up a couple of mountains for a week or so. So, gents, I don't know if you would like the last word to our guests today.
Just to say thank you, Graeme, for inviting me along today. Really enjoyed it. And if anybody, you know, online today wants just a chat, you know, by all means, just drop me an email. Happy to have a chat and, you know, help people on their carbon journey.
Brilliant.
Yeah, likewise from me. Just connect on LinkedIn, follow ImageCo and see what we're up to. We're happy to share what we're doing. Or give me a call, have a chat, drop me an email. Happy to help.
Brilliant. All right, gentlemen, until the
next
time, take care.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Graeme. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.